I'd like to welcome Father Oscar Momanyi, S.J., who's going to be presenting today on Bernard Lonergan and African Communitarian Ethics in Dialogue for Ecological and Societal Conversion. Won't you join me in welcoming him?
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ben and Joseph, for accepting my paper and inviting me to come and present. It's an honor to be with you all, and especially the dean now is here. I have to set the bar high. So my topic is Bernard Lonergan and African Communitarian Ethics and Spirituality. I added spirituality in the topic, in dialogue for ecological and societal conversion. I will not use the slides. I will just read my paper and I'll write some few things on the board. In this paper, I will argue that there is a need to recover African communitarian ethics and spirituality, which can help revive the sacredness of creation in people's consciousness, especially in Africa. Such an ethical spiritual framework, which is by nature primal, can support ecological conversion and help tackle the climate crisis on the continent. To achieve my objectives, I will seek a dialogue between Bernard Lonergan's thought and African ethics and spirituality inherent in the communitarian worldviews found in many African communities across the continent.
Forgive the interruption, Oscar. I just want to make sure we can see you when you write on the board.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. These worldviews are represented in this paper by the South African notion of Ubuntu, a popular version of this Afro-ethical framework. Ubuntu is a rich and multifaceted notion that has no comprehensive definition. It's kind of comprehensive, kind of very rich. Nonetheless, Johan Broderick has defined it as an African worldview based on the primary values of intense humanness, caring, sharing, respect, compassion, and other associated values that ensure a happy and qualitative community life in the spirit of family. I divide this paper into three parts. In the first part, I will discuss the root causes of the current ecological and societal crisis in the African continent. In the second part, I will discuss how a revival of African communitarian ethics and spirituality can be achieved by the help of Lonergan's thought. In the third part, I will offer an illustration of how ecological conversion can take place in African communities. The root causes of the ecological and societal crisis in Africa. And Africa is a very diverse continent, so to speak about Africa is quite a mouthful thing to do. So, but I am speaking about Africa in general because of the common threads that I can discern across the communities across countries and communities in Africa. We will discuss more of that in the question Q&A. The uncritical embrace of the technocratic paradigm of development has fueled by the forces of globalization, has led to the erosion of the African ethical and spiritual worldview. Post-independence Africa has seen rapid urbanization coupled with a population boom in the last 30 to 40 years. Remember that most countries in Africa became independent in late 50s and early 60s. So it's not a long time frame. Marquette started in 1890. So Marquette is older than all the African countries. So yeah. So in the last 30 and 40 years, we have seen a boom of population growth. When I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, Kenya, my country, we were about 20 million. Now, as we speak, we are about 60 million. Nigeria, as I was when I was growing up, I used to think Nigeria is so populated. It was only 70 million. Now it's about 200 million. So you can see there was a population boom there in Africa. So this has caused a lot of people to move from rural life to urban life. This process, in some cases, this process of rural to urban migration has been accompanied by the African people devaluing their traditional African lives and values as irrational and backward, and has encouraged an uncritical embrace of Western ideals as a way of life. This situation, I argue, has led to a cultural and societal decline in many African countries because people have lost their cultural, moral, spiritual identity by this uncritical embrace of Western identity. It is possible to link these problems of Africa, problems such as corruption and other problems in Africa, because of this loss of African cultural identity. This process of undermining African cultural heritage has its roots in the colonial and missionary enterprises that sought to conquer the minds and hearts of Africans. And I think most of the presentations today had something to do with colonialism. And I was happy to see the connection with what I'm going to share here. Colonialism and missionary Christianity, without denying the positive impact of missionaries on the continent, without them I would not have been here. They really did good work, but of course there's some things that did not go very well. So without denying the positive impact of missionaries on the continent, colonialism and missionary Christianity were in many ways birds of the same feather. The plunder and violence that accompanied colonialism and seemed to be legitimized by the silence and the complicity of missionaries negatively affected the consciousness of many African people. The brutal colonial enterprise and its missionary form of Christianity were in many cases accompanied by a process of erosion of African identity, communitarian ethics, and their spirituality, which is the soul of the African people. The African way of life, culture, spirituality, religion were viewed as pagan animism, and that needed to be replaced by a Western version of Christianity. Africans, in my argument, need to go through what Lonergan refers to as self-appropriation in the quest to recover the lost values of their communitarian life. Such a recovery can take place through intelligent and reflective inquiry that can help people to get to know, through the process of insight, what is true and valuable in their alienated identity. Lonergan refers to the process of coming to know in this way as self-appropriation, which is responsible for human progress. To illustrate what insight and self-appropriation represent, Lonergan observes that insight is not only a mental activity but a constituent factor of human knowledge. And self-appropriation is a series of exercises in which we move towards the functionally operative tendencies that ground ideal knowledge. The recovery of African cultural values and heritage resonates with Lonergan's self-appropriation. It is an intelligent process in which the African person seeks to rediscover their identity and dignity. This is to go back to a previous presentation. Even though Lonergan seems to be not really talking about the third world, I just seek to appropriate his thinking to this situation. The process of conversion or transformation that results from this self-appropriation in Africa should include a critique of missionary Christianity. So how did we receive our Christianity? We need to critique that and to embrace a form of African Christianity that cherishes African values and spiritual heritage, and at the same time is conscious about letting go of what is not valuable in the African indigenous past. There's a lot of work which has been done about enculturation, but most of the time, people downplay enculturation. They say this is witchcraft. So, because our psyche, and me included, we are very Western in our way we look at things. And so when you talk about enculturation, there's sometimes we doubt, what is this thing? Sometimes we feel that it's pushed too far. So we need to really do this self-appropriation and really do this proper enculturation of the African Christianity. I don't know if it will happen in our lifetime, maybe in the next, I don't know. Okay, I lost my way here. This reappropriation resonates with Lonergan's notion of conversion, which can work hand in hand with Francis's notion of ecological conversion. Lonergan describes conversion, and I used thank you so much for your article. I really drew a lot from that, and I was happy to hear that you were talking about it here again. Lonergan describes conversion as a transformation of the subject and his or her world. It is not just a development or even a series of developments, but a resultant change of course and direction. It is a process of looking at reality with new eyes, in which there emerges something new that fructifies in interlocking, cumulative sequences of development on all levels and all departments of human living. Some of these words that Lonergan uses are a bit big. Lonergan outlines living alone in the 35th place, which Joseph was the one who told me, now in the 35th place. And I was wondering what he was talking about. Lonergan outlines 3 forms of conversion that work together. I think that we know: intellectual, moral, and religious conversion. Firstly, intellectual conversion is a radical clarification and consequently the elimination of exceedingly stubborn and misleading myth concerning reality, objectivity, and human knowledge. This misleading the misleading colonial missionary enterprise that alienated Africans from their true selves calls for an intellectual conversion. Secondly, moral conversion changes the criterion of one's decisions and choices from satisfactions to values. In reappropriating African ethics and spirituality, African people can be empowered to make choices that are consistent with the African cosmic worldview that values communal relations that go beyond the human community to include nature. Thirdly, religious conversion is being grasped by ultimate concern. It is otherworldly falling in love, a total and permanent surrender without conditions, qualifications, and reservations. But such a surrender is understood not as an act, but as a dynamic state that is before and principle of subsequent acts. Part of the religious conversion in Africa will include the reappropriation of African Christianity in a way that one of the African theologians and philosopher envisions. His name is Fabian Ebusi Bulaga, who envisions this in his book, Christianity Without Fetishes, in which he argues that a rediscovery of authentic African culture and values is the basis of a true African Christianity. He advocates for the re-evaluation of the colonial missionary version of Christianity, which he views as a Western fetish. I think when I first read this, I say, what is he talking about? So he argues that the form of Christianity that Africans received is a Western fetish, and he says that we need to get rid of that Western fetish, and because of the use of Western categories to evangelize Africa and reimagine African Christianity using African categories. and the African category that can help us reimagine African Christianity through this process of self-appropriation, through this process of conversion, is the revival of African communitarian ethics and spirituality through Ubuntu. And that is the second part of my paper. Due to the above factors, namely globalization, rapid urbanization, and colonial missionary enterprise that have undermined the African communal ethical spiritual framework, there is a need to reclaim, as I mentioned above, the African communitarian ethics and spirituality. Ubuntu, the current trends of globalization and urbanization tempts Africans to look away and forget that a rediscovery of their identity and culture is necessary to stop the long cycle of cultural and identity decline, ushered by the processes that I have mentioned above. Communal life, which is at the heart of African communitarian ethics and spirituality, is linked to the notion of Ubuntu, which I've introduced at the beginning. And it has parallels in many African countries. That's why I'm speaking about Africans in Africa in general. If you go to many African countries, the parallels of Ubuntu are there. For example, recently I was listening to a talk here about Christian-Muslim dialogue in Africa. In Senegal, and I learned that in Senegal they have something called teranga. It's similar to Ubuntu. In Tanzania they have another one called ujamaa, which is familyhood, very similar to Ubuntu. In Burundi and Rwanda they have something called ubushingatahe, very similar to Ubuntu. So if you look across African cultures, you find something similar to Ubuntu. In Kenya we have something called harambe, which means pulling together as a community. It's very, very close to Ubuntu. Community life is central in understanding Ubuntu because it holds the community together. It's a force for harmony and unity among the people. The origin of Ubuntu as a communitarian anthropology is the South African proverbs, Umuntu gumuntu gabantu, which literally means a person is a person through other persons. This proverb can also mean each individual's humanity is ideally expressed in the relationship with others. According to Ubuntu ethics, there exists a common bond between human beings, and it is through this connection that with fellow human beings that people discover their human qualities. Ubuntu emphasizes the fact that it is by recognizing the inviolable humanity of other people that an individual becomes fully human. Mogobe Ramose, not Mugabe, so this is a South African philosopher, Mogobe Ramose, has done some studies on Ubuntu in articles, mainly in articles. I haven't seen a really full philosophical monograph on Ubuntu. Mogobe Ramose succinctly argues that to be a human being is to affirm one's humanity by recognizing the humanity of others, and on that basis establish human relationship with them. The word Ubuntu articulates a basic respect for and compassion for others because everyone is endowed with an inviolable dignity. Ramose goes on to give the following philosophical analysis of Ubuntu that helps appreciate its dynamism. It consists of a prefix, so Ubuntu. So the prefix is Ubu, and then the stem is Ntu. So Ubu Ntu. So he gives a philosophical analysis of that. Ubu evokes the idea of being in general. So being. It is enfolded being before it manifests itself in a concrete form or mode of existence in a particular entity. Ramose continues to observe that Ubu, as an enfolded being, is always oriented towards unfoldment. So enfoldment oriented towards unfoldment. That is insistent, continual, concrete manifestation through particular forms or modes of being which calls, which are manifested by Ntu. So Ubu is always oriented towards Ntu. So Ubuntu. In this sense, Ubu is always oriented towards Ntu. Ontologically, Ramose notes that there is no separation or division between Ubuntu. The two are mutually founding in the sense that they are two aspects of being, as oneness and indivisible. They are one and indivisible aspects of being. Accordingly, Ubuntu is the fundamental ontological and epistemological category in African thought. It is through this way of conceiving Ubuntu as a unity that harmony, togetherness, and other values arise in the African communitarian setup. The concept vital force, promulgated by Placide Tempels, a Belgian missionary in Congo, even though missionaries, as I said, did some things which were not good because of their complicity with colonialism, they also did other good things. So Placide Tempels did a very good study of the Baluba people of Congo and realized the notion of vital force. And vital force is very important in understanding the link between Ubuntu, being, and participation in the quest for common sharing in a community. This vital force is the life force, the cause of being, and it extends from the natural to the supernatural, from physical to metaphysical aspects. So other philosophers and theologians, Africans, took this notion of vital force and developed it. Some of those are like Rwandese, Alexis Kagame, another one from Congo, Vincent Mulago. So they have been working with this idea of vital force. So vital force as the force of life, a cause of being, and it extends from the natural to the supernatural, from physical to the metaphysical aspects of reality. It is the life force of everything, both animate and inanimate, which are all interconnected. Because of this intricate interconnection, it is possible to argue that Ubuntu and vital forces are the foundations of African integral ecology. Vital forces occur in the context of hierarchy of being. And hierarchy of being starts with the supreme being, and then the spirits, and then the ancestors, and then the living, and then the natural world. So, and then all these are connected with the vital forces. And ancestors are always in connection with God and with the living people. And they are the ones responsible for harmony. So if through virtuous living in community, the ancestors connect the community with the spirits and with God. Bad unethical behavior within community unsettles the ancestors, makes them unhappy, and therefore they will be the balance in this hierarchy of being is unsettled, and therefore calamities, even natural disasters. So you need to be in harmony with the living and the natural environment in order to have harmony, a cosmic harmony, a harmony between human beings and also with nature. And ancestors are important in ensuring that. Abundant life is achieved when human beings are in communion with their ancestors and among themselves. Some rituals and taboos govern the relationship between the living and the ancestors. If the rituals and taboos are not observed, then life is threatened. Communion among human beings show that harmony exists between the living and the ancestors. Because they are intermediaries between the living realities and the spirit worlds. Natural calamities are the sign that ancestors are not happy, and thus rituals need to be performed in order to restore harmony between nature and the living and the relationship with the ancestors. Ubuntu is crucial in keeping the balance of the vital forces in this ecosocial system. Human beings in community living a good life help maintain good relationship with the ancestors. It is evident in the above ethico-spiritual framework of hierarchy of beings that a good relationship with the environment is crucial. And this is connected to the notion of totemism. Totems in this African worldview, are certain animals and plants that link human beings with ancestors and spirits that are given preferential treatments. Totems are non-human objects of nature, such as animals, plants, even rocks, inhabited by ancestral spirits which have taboos associated to them. Totems link the living with ancestors who continue to live through them, which are special symbols for clans, a special symbol for clans in many ethnic communities. In this way, totems also identify people as belonging in particular communities. So like if I have my totem, we have a totem of our clan, we cannot just kill it. We have to protect it as sacred. So if I protect the totem of my clan, and you protect the totems of your clan, both plants and animals, then we are collectively taking part in protecting the environment from this destruction. Let me do this final part, and then we move on to Q&A. I think that will be and then maybe the other things will come through the Q&A. Ubuntu as an emerging good. I recently read the book, Patrick's book about environment, and I like the idea of emerging good. Ubuntu as a communitarian ethical framework is a guide to ethical human action in the context of the African community, in the context of community in Africa. It is possible to argue using Lonergan categories developed further by Patrick Brand to note that Ubuntu as an ethical framework is a participation in the intelligible process of emergent probability that has been going on in the world, at least in the African world. This is so, however, only insofar as human actions and cooperations result from truly objective deliberations that address all relevant questions and are guided by fully converted horizons of feelings. Ubuntu as an ethical framework in the African continent emerged organically from primal culture and continues to hold the societies of Africa together, even though its influence is waning. It is based on an intrinsic desire to know in the quest for truth and cosmic harmony. This is the main reason why there is a need for the self-reappropriation of the African person in light of Ubuntu in order to return to the treasures of Ubuntu. The decline of Ubuntu ethic in Africa has been a result of many human actions and cooperative ventures that are taken within distorted horizons of value feelings, and before all questions have been faced intelligibly and reasonably. Then the institutions and social orders are only partly intelligible and have been mutilated and have mutilated values. So the breakdown of this Ubuntu can be restored by the recovery of this for the African people that can help them have this holistic worldview of life. Let me stop there and then. I cut my paper into half, but it still seems to be a lot.
Right. Thank you, Father, very much. I wonder if, in light of the sort of demographic shift you were describing at the beginning of your paper, and the sort of not just population explosion, but growth of urbanization, what kinds of transformations in this reappropriation of Ubuntu do you think are necessary to meet this sort of new social context of the city? I think especially of like Cyril Orgy's proposal for Ubuntocracy.
I was coming to that, so it's here. Okay, all right. So when we African countries got independent, most of our founding fathers, I was going to that. Most of our founding fathers had Ubuntu, notions of Ubuntu in their political ideologies. Like in Tanzania, Ujamaa, familyhood. In Kenya, Harambee, pulling together. In South Africa, Ubuntu is still there, and we still other parts. So we had a framework of really taking Ubuntu as a way of developing ourselves. But because of the our alienated African psyche, a lot of things have happened. There's a lot of Ubuntu has been put aside, and there is another Cameroonian philosopher who calls a certain kind of politics that is in Africa necropolitics. Necropolitics has taken over, where there is a lot of political ideologies that favor accumulation of wealth, killing of political opponents, that kind of a thing. So, how do we go back to Ubuntocracy? How do we develop back to our Ubuntocracy? Maybe we have to rethink about how we, maybe as church people or whoever who can do it, reimagine our politics. That's from the macro level, to reimagine our politics. Pope Francis talks about political love in Fratelli Tutti. How can we have that political love in line with Ubuntu in Africa? That is not an easy thing to do. In Zimbabwe, a few years ago, I worked in social apostolate a little bit, and I was interacting with some people from social apostolate in Zimbabwe. They had a very good program whereby they had retreats for parliamentarians. So they will take parliamentarians for retreat. How they did that, I don't know, because I know African politicians, they will not accept that. I don't think. So how do we, if for example, you've managed to have a retreat for parliamentarians, how can we help them revive this Ubuntu in them, and also develop a political framework out of this Ubuntu? That is a very big question. The other way we can do it, and which is possible, and I think it's happening, is from the grassroots communities, and that was the last part of my paper. From grassroots communities. In the Catholic Church in Africa, we have small Christian communities, which is like best Christian communities in Latin America. So I believe, and I think it's possible, we could bring back Ubuntu through these communities, whereby there is sharing, there is faith sharing, there is aspects of social justice from the grassroots, where we could even talk about ecological conversion through Ubuntu. So that could be the ways, the two ways. I think the from below way is the easiest way for us. From above, I don't know. The political route is a bit difficult. Yes, Patrick.
Yes, thank you, Father Oscar. When you were talking towards the end about the kind of totemism, where there are these objects or these plants or animals or sites that provide this link to the ancestral spirits, and I understand the problem of generalization that I'm about to ask about.
Yes.
So be it. Is there a sense in any communities where that respect for, say, this sacred lake is universalized into all lakes are sacred or all trees are sacred? Like this tree has the ancestor spirit.
Okay.
So do we cut down the other ones?
No, okay. All right, I get it. Yeah. So generally, in the hierarchy of beings and the vital forces, everything is sacred. But there are some which are preferential. Yeah. So like, but the preferential nature is to show that this is just preferential. Doesn't mean that the others are not should be cut down.
Right.
So it's just preferred, but it's a way to remind the African person that this nature is sacred. So it should be extended to everything, not particular. I remember I was with another Jesuit from Zambia. He started me as a certain type of snake. And so anytime we go somewhere, he just says, I smell a snake.
Okay.
And really, honestly, when you look at it, you find so it's something intrinsic. Is how it's if he could do that, I don't know how. I can't tell if there's a snake yet.
Thank you very much, Oscar. Cynthia's paper was on indigenous wisdom from a perspective of learning from it by non-indigenous people. And I'm wondering about Ubuntu as a source of wisdom for people who are not African. I'm wondering about there could be universal meaning in the very particularity of Ubuntu that those of us who are not African could learn from.
Yeah, so in my conclusion, I was going to go into that. I was arguing in my conclusion that since we're living in a globalized world, and Africa is really, we are really influenced so much with the West. It's like sometimes we are like people living in the West. Yeah, so we can have a dialogue between the technocratic individual paradigm of the West, which is not also bad. I'm not saying that it's bad. Also, our communitarian paradigm, which is, I'm not saying it's the best. We can have a dialogue between the two in which we can enrich one another. We can have a fusion of horizon, horizon between the two that we can learn from the West can learn from us, and those people who are moving and living in cities, living the Western life in the cities, can still appropriate something from their rural life that is close to nature, that is close to really the cosmic unity between humans and nature. So it's a process of learning. Brueggemann calls it a dialogic way of being, dialogic conversation between. We cannot afford in the globalized world to be monologue, to engage in a monologue. We always need to develop a way of having a dialogue between cultures.
Won't you join me in thanking Oscar? Theoretically, Taylor's talk started 3 minutes ago, but my suspicion is that after 2 very full talks and what I expect to be a really excellent and intense talk from Taylor, that we all need at least 10 minutes. So why don't we try to meet back at around 1/4 past? That should still give us plenty of time for